Now that I have your attention with the thumbnail, hi, I'm Gumi the Hero, and today I want to tell you all about Sudeki. Sudeki is a weird gem of a game that I can really only describe as missed potential. To explain why that is, I would like to give a little bit of backstory first before I get into the main meat of this video. And if you do enjoy the video, please like and subscribe and share it with your friends. I would definitely appreciate it. Sudeki was going to be originally developed for the Sega Dreamcast under the name Symphony of Light. But then for whatever reason, Climax Studios decided to completely switch focus and try developing it for other platforms like the PlayStation 2 and Windows PC. At some point, someone at Microsoft ended up catching wind of this and decided to offer Climax a deal that they just couldn't refuse. Microsoft would publish the game and promote it, under one condition. Change everything. And also they own the IP now. At the time, Microsoft had just recently released their shiny brand new game console, the Xbox, but noticed it was lacking something really important: a Japanese game. Or, to be more specific, a Japanese RPG. Before the Xbox, Sony's PlayStation was the place to play those cool-looking anime games, and before that it was Nintendo. The PlayStation 2 had also already launched with the next big Final Fantasy game, and Microsoft really wanted a piece of that Japanese pie, even if it meant baking it themselves. So they took that weird little game that Climax was making and tried to turn it into their own console-exclusive JRPG to try and attract the anime crowd. Keep in mind that Climax Studios is a British developer, not a Japanese one. They even went as far as changing the game's name from Symphony of Light to Sudeki in order to make it sound like a Japanese game, which is really funny when you learn that this title is actually a mistranslation. Initially, the game was supposed to be called Sudeki, which is the Japanese word for great, but something got communicated wrong, I guess, and the T ended up switching to a D. They were just one letter off. But as much as I do really like this game, I cannot honestly say that it is very Sudeki. The game opens up with a lore dump that explains how a god named Tetsu once ruled over a world called Sudeki. Then one day he got really lonely and decided to pull an Adam and Eve and tried to create a sibling from his own flesh. But it turns out the brother he made was evil and wanted to take the world for himself. So Tetsu and his brother fought over Sudeki and Tetsu lost, thus splitting the world's reality in two, creating a world of light and a world of dark. What's that? Anyways, in order to reclaim his power, Tetsu would select 4 warriors from the world of light to combat his brother Haigu using the power of friendship. Don't tell me this is gonna be a thing. Please. Anyways, where were we? Oh, right. Power of friendship. So they could defeat him and reunite the world to its original form. We then cut to one of the crunchiest, most deep-fried cutscenes I've ever seen. By the way, I'm playing the PC version of this game. That's probably why it looks so bad. I'm sure that it looks much better on the original Xbox hardware. Probably. Where we're introduced to the main character, Tal. And you can tell he's the main character because despite the fact that he is just an ordinary soldier in the Kingdom's army, he's the only one not in proper uniform. How he got away with it, I'll never know. Probably has something to do with his dad being the army's general. Moving along, we're given the mission to escort the Kingdom's princess back home after she left to go visit a small fishing village for whatever reason, and also the Dark World's army is attacking and we need to make sure that she's safe. It's oddly convenient that all this is happening at the same time, but I guess no one can really predict when the Army of Darkness will just spawn in from out of thin air and create a traffic jam. Gameplay-wise, Sudeki is actually pretty fun. Well, mostly, but I'll get into that little caveat later. It has a unique combat system that I haven't really seen too often in gaming, much less a game from 20 years ago. Tal has a variety of attacks and combos that he can perform based off of different button combinations, but you can't just mash your way through a fight, otherwise you'll do nothing. Instead, what you actually have to do is time your presses in a rhythmic fashion in order to do all of these attacks. A lot of them also have different uses as well, like stunning enemies for example, or juggling them in the air. This can actually lead to a bit of strategy as you plan your attacks and when to use them, which I actually really like. There's also a wide variety of special moves that you can do as well, and unlike other games where you just press a button and watch the skill animation play out, in Sudeki you're actually given a window of time for you to line up your attack with as many targets as possible before the skill activates. Plus, on top of that, you also have summons that you can use as well that instantly destroy everything on screen. It's really helpful for when you're backed into a corner or facing off against a ton of enemies, though I can't really say I'm the biggest fan of how you need to get hurt in order to build the meter to use them. Now, if you watched that whole section, you might have noticed that this game is very, very violent. Like, shockingly so. I was really caught off guard at some of the things I saw when I first played this game a few years back. They really wanted that M rating, huh? It's kinda funny in hindsight because the violence and gore is really the only thing that's keeping this game from having a lower age rating. Well, that and two very round things which I'll touch upon in a sec. Outside of combat, you'll spend most of your time running around the game's open world. And by open world, I mean a bunch of linear hallways. There's really not much to do here other than go from point A to point B, with some roads having little side areas that hide secrets and treasure. Also, I don't know if it's because the developers were new to 3D at the time, but the camera is also weirdly close to the ground in a lot of instances and slightly pointed up, which I'm sure was just a mistake. But really though, it can be kind of annoying to deal with, especially when it clips through the ground and other objects. What a conveniently placed glitch. Anyways, we go to the village and find the princess we're looking for, named Holy! Oh my god! Lord.
Damn, boy! You better get the best for me.
Okay, I'm just gonna get this part out of the way right now, because the sexualization of this game's female lead isn't something that can really be avoided. Ailish looks less like a princess and more like a stripper, so that's why the camera's always pointed up. Clearly the character designers knew what they were doing here. And look, I get it, it was 2004, a different time when you could mostly get away with something like this. Hell, Ailish is even front and center on the game's box to try and sell copies to horny teenage boys. There's no real reason for her to look like this, other than to be someone's wet dream. It kinda feels like they were trying to push Ailish to be this sex symbol for Xbox gaming the same way Lara Croft was back in the day. That or Microsoft really wanted to try and sell as many copies as quickly as they could after seeing the final product. And to be completely honest, I like it. Ailish is hot, and I'm not just talking about her body. She has the personality of the flirty, teasing, mischievous girl next door that all the neighborhood boys had a crush on and totally said that they would marry one day. And she rocks that vibe in full confidence. She's a bad bitch, and she doesn't just know it, she owns it.
Yeah, you go, pussy queen!
In fact, I'd honestly say that Ailish is my favorite character in this game next to Tal. Not only is she nice to look at, but she also goes through a pretty good character arc and is fairly well written. Well, for what it's worth. It's also ironically funny that as the game progresses, she actually wears more clothes, which I also wonder if that was on purpose. Though, to be honest, I like her main outfit the best. It's honestly just really cute. I can guarantee you that if this game came out today, either A, it wouldn't, or B, Ailish would be standing atop the pillars of strong, sexy female leads beside Bayonetta, 2B, and I guess now Eve. Though it is kind of a shame that her ass gets more attention than anything else. And she isn't the only character that gets this treatment either. Oh, come on! Look, I like lewd and degenerate stuff as much as the next Lonely Coomer, but even I know when something is too much or unnecessary. Like, come on, did she really need to twist her body like this in order to climb this ladder? I didn't think I'd spend so long ranting about that. Anyways, with Ailish in our party, it's now time to head back along the exact same linear path that we just ran through to get to her. And here's where things get interesting. Now you're probably wondering how this
Weak and feeble woman.
will fight off all the scary monsters in this game. Well, like this, of course. Need I say more? Okay, fine. As you can see, Ailish pulls out the literal magic boomstick and goes to town, turning this role-playing game into a first-person shooter. She has multiple different staffs that she can equip and cycle through as well that all have different effects. Of course, she can't just shoot forever because she has to reload her magic, for some reason, and different staffs all have different reload times, which further adds on to that whole strategy thing from earlier of choosing what kind of staff you want to use in that moment. And further adding on to that strategy bit, you can also seamlessly swap between your party members mid-battle, albeit it can be a little bit disorienting to do so, especially going from Tal in a third-person view to Ailish in a first-person view. The same thing also applies to your other party members as well, Buki and Elko. Buki plays nearly identical to Tal, focusing on up-close physical combat, and Elko plays nearly identical to Ailish. So you know what that means. Even though the party members all play identically to each other, they each have enough differences to make them viable. Not that you have a real choice, because they're all you've got until the end of the game. You're not going to be able to just stick to one person either, because combat can get very chaotic, and in order to not die, you'll need to jump around to other characters. For example, Ailish focuses on magic and acts as the party's main healer, while Elko focuses more on raw damage and can buff the party. This same logic also applies to Tal and Buki, where Tal is more of a tank and Buki is more of a DPS. Despite its looks, Sudeki can actually be pretty hard, and I don't mean that in a good way, I mean that in a this game is very unfair kind of way. There's a reason why most battles usually have a save point before or after them. Most of the time, you're up against hordes of enemies that will kill you before you can do anything, or just trap you in a corner and go to town. Like this area here, where these fish people drain my SP whenever I hit them, meaning that 1. I can't use any of my skill attacks, and 2. I can't use Ailish to heal anyone. Also, they constantly heal themselves, which makes the fight drag on forever. And since recovery items are hard to come by and you're limited to whatever you have on hand at the moment and can only carry a small limited amount in your inventory, it can lead to a lot of frustrating and rage-inducing moments. There were many times where I was just screwed no matter what I did, not for lack of preparation or anything like that, mind you, but simply because my party got ripped to shreds in the previous fight, and I didn't have a way to get more potions before the next obnoxiously hard battle. Of course, there are ways to make things easier. Asterisk. You can get newer/stronger weapons from treasure chests, buying them from the shops at insanely expensive prices, or by completing side quests. But you can't buy new armor or anything like that because it's actually given to you by Tetsu as the game naturally progresses. You can, however, upgrade and enhance your weapons and armor at a blacksmith, but at a very pricey cost. And unless you really happen to like using a specific weapon, there's really no reason to spend the money to upgrade it, as you'll probably come across something better sooner rather than later. Honestly, everything in this game is just absurdly expensive, including the healing items. This stupid duck and his terrible customer service skills run every single shop in the game. And it all costs way too much.
It's cheapskates like you that make me work longer hours.
It really wouldn't be so bad if making money in this game wasn't tedious as all get out. Because, while you can sell stuff to the evil duck, he will barely give you anything for it. Instead, if you want to make money, you'll have to sell your loot to a merchant. But not just any merchant, it has to be a specific merchant who only has interest in specific items. For example, let's say you have a bunch of wolf pelts that you want to sell. Well, you can't sell it to this merchant because he only cares about scales and will give you a low price for those pelts. Instead, you'll have to run all the way out to this guy in the middle of nowhere to sell them for a somewhat decent price. Keep in mind, there is no real fast travel in this game, and battles are unavoidable. And if you happen to have no healing items, you just might be screwed. Meaning you'll either need to A, wish for a miracle, B, reload a prior save if you have one from when you had money, or C, just restart the entire game from the beginning and hopefully make better financial choices. Luckily, this game isn't very long, clocking in at around 12-ish hours, but suddenly having something happen at the 8-hour mark that makes a section unpassable unless you fully restart is definitely a bad thing the developers clearly didn't think about. And yes, this did happen to me twice. Okay, I think that's enough negative talk for now. Other than wandering around the world, a bulk of the game will take place in dungeons. And these are some classic-ass video game dungeons. You know, pushing block puzzles, flipping switches, the usual stuff that I'm certain that you haven't seen in other games before. They're actually pretty fun to go through in my opinion, and they really don't overstay their welcome. Although the boss fights are kind of weird. Each of the characters fight the bosses one-on-one for story reasons. Well, 2 of them at least. And while I don't dislike this idea, I do feel like they could have been done better. They're not really all that challenging, and they have really predictable attack patterns which make them pretty easy, except for this fight. I know I talked about the characters all being viable in battle, but they also have their uses while exploring too. Each party member has a specific field talent they can use to make traversing the overworld and dungeons a bit more interesting. Tal is a big warrior man, so of course he can push and pull blocks and statues. Ailish is a mage, so she's able to see and reveal invisible items. Buki is a cat girl thing, and can use her claw weapons to climb up and down walls. And Elko is a scientist, so obviously he has a jetpack that lets him cross wide gaps. The way you spec your character's stats is also really nice too. Whereas with most games, you just watch a number go up and that's kind of it, Sudeki uses a more visual way of showing your progress. Whenever you level up, you get these little skill stones that you can allocate your stats with. 1 stone equals 1 stat upgrade. I actually really like this method of leveling up. Yeah, numbers do a fine enough job, I guess, but visually seeing the progress of these stat increases is just really satisfying, especially hearing the little whenever you do. I've always been a big fan of visual simplicity when it comes to things like this, like when a game shows you how much experience you get from killing an enemy by having it be a tangible item you can pick up. I'm not saying numbers are bad, but they do make my brain hurt. Another thing that I really like is just the overall visual atmosphere and vibe this game has. Yeah, sure, the combat can be stressful and chaotic, but outside of that, everything is just chill. I don't quite know how to explain it, but Sudeki is the type of game that you fire up on a warm autumn afternoon with a cup of tea and the fuzziest socks you own. The game is very pretty for what it's worth being an early Xbox game, and the environments are all colorful and pleasant to run through. Because the world is just one long hallway, each place looks distinct with a wide variety of biomes to look at. The towns are also really cozy as well, to the point where you could just hang around them for hours at a time, which I did. And the music. Gosh, the music. It's the definition of relaxing. I mean, yeah, some tracks can be a little generic sounding, but honestly, those are few and far between. Like this song, for instance, that plays in Brightwater, the first village that you go to. It might just be one of the chillest songs I've ever heard in an RPG. On the subject of sound, the game is also fully voiced. Not by just the main cast or in cutscenes, but even the NPCs as well. though the quality of the voice acting is kind of on the table, especially for some possibly offensive accents.
Lay your skin on me. I can't get enough.
Call me Higren, blacksmith, sword master, and enchanter of weapons and armor.
I was once the Minister of Anthropomorphic Affairs, but both my tribe and the government have fallen by the wayside.
Or just some really annoying ones.
Hey, New Brightwater has a royal guest today. That's right. Princess Ailish of Illumina.
He was a brave and dutiful son. The way you talk makes me sound like little more than a statistic.
They call me Minnie, but I'm gonna grow up into a mean mama.
Okay, look, it was 2004. Things were different back then. We already covered this when talking about Ailish's ass. Obviously, Ailish also has the best voice in the game, and I'm not just saying that out of a bias.
Let's go then. I never wanted to come to this dreary little town in the first place. Besides, I promised Elko I'd see his crystal tower light up.
It's so peaceful. You know, Shulk, I hope every day can be like this, always.
Okay, I know it's not the same voice actor, but the voice is kinda close and that's good enough for me. Like, they didn't have to voice this entire game, but I'm glad that they went the extra mile and did it anyways, despite the questionable quality of the talent on display. Heck, even most modern games can't do full voice acting, which is kind of disappointing when you think about it. And speaking of disappointing, I guess it's time to talk about the story. I won't lie, I was kind of dreading this part, so here goes. Remember how at the beginning of the video I said, Sudeki is a weird gem of a game that I can really only describe as missed potential. Yeah, I was mainly talking about the story and writing when I said that. And I'm just gonna say it flat out. The story is not good. I wouldn't say it's terrible, but it's inoffensive at best and extremely generic at worst. The game takes place in the world of light called Hyskilia, in the country of Illumina, within the realms of the Bright Kingdom. Yeah. The queen, who totally isn't evil at all, tasks our heroes to go around and collect 4 crystals in order to power a machine that will supposedly protect everyone from the invading Dark World's army. That's it. I mean, obviously, stuff happens outside of that, but it's all so minuscule, it's not really worth mentioning. It's an extremely safe, generic, uninspired, tropey, cliche-filled story. Of course the queen is actually evil and wants to resurrect Haigu so she can be immortal. Who could have seen that coming? The characters don't really fare much better in terms of writing either, as they're all pretty shallow with the exception of Tal and Ailish, which frankly isn't saying very much. Tal is a soldier who always seems to get his squad mates killed, including his brother, which his dad deeply resents him for. And you can see that it really gets to him, with his main character arc focusing on learning to forgive himself and become a better protector and a better leader. Ailish is the princess of the Bright Kingdom and also one of its most powerful sorcerers. Despite this, she's constantly under scrutiny of her mother, who refuses to see her as more than a nuisance. Because of this, Ailish is very bratty and rebellious and constantly tries to gain her mother's approval. Her character arc is more or less learning that she's more than what her mother tells her, and the only approval that she really needs is her own, and that's kind of it for the two of them. Elko and Buki are just non-existent in that aspect and fall even further into the generic trope of writing. Buki is a tribal warrior who is very religious and will never let you forget that, and also she hates technology. Elko is a scientist who loves technology and only believes in facts, and anything that isn't that is just nonsense. Obviously, these two were meant to butt heads and provide sexual tension, but completely failed to do so. Buki's entire character arc consists of a single cutscene where she says,
This metal land is a godless place.
and then Tetsu just pops in and says, Hey, you're doing cool, man. And then suddenly Buki's all,
I understand now that science is a product of nature. There is nothing here for me to fear.
and that's it. It's a 90-second cutscene and praise technology! Elko is virtually no different. It's not all done in a single cutscene, but it's just as bad. Even when literally God appears in front of him, he writes it off as a prank. And then when Tetsu appears before him again later on and says, it's destiny time, stop being a little bitch, Elko suddenly changes his mind about everything. In fact, let's talk about Tetsu for a moment, because I don't think I've ever seen a more useless character in a game. He's supposed to be the god of this world, trying to guide our heroes forward and bring them closer to their fate of saving it. But he pops in at the most random times and only spews word vomit. He comes in, says nothing, and then leaves. That's it. Ultimately, nothing is gained from his existence. It would be different if when Tetsu appeared he said more than 2 sentences, but no, I guess that would be too much work for the writers. Ultimately, nothing is also what I'd describe the party dynamic as well. They're just there. Which is frustrating because the writers clearly had some kind of idea of how they'd interact. Tal and Ailish are obviously really into each other, but they don't act upon it. Apparently, there was even an axed cutscene from the ending where they actually kissed and got married, but it never happened. Like previously stated, Buki and Elko are also meant to have sexual tension due to their opposing viewpoints, but it's only hinted at. Ailish and Buki are also supposed to have a budding friendship where Ailish says that she wished she could be strong like Buki, and Buki even saying that she would gladly teach Ailish her warrior ways, but it never gets touched upon again outside of that single instance. And Tal and Elko are supposed to be friends, but they hardly ever act like it outside of a singular cutscene. The story itself is extremely linear and very poorly paced, with everything happening way too fast. When I was looking up stuff to write about for this video, I came across an interview where the developers said that they wanted to have a linear experience to make things easier for the player to understand the story, while also trying to make it not drag out for very long. But this ultimately became a detriment to Sudeki's, well, everything. They say that they came up with the gameplay first and then based everything around it afterwards, which I can believe because the game is very fun, like I was talking about before. But I can only assume that the part about the more linear and focused story was in lieu of Final Fantasy X that had released around the same time Sudeki really started its full development. For those who don't know, Final Fantasy X is an extremely linear game with a very linear story, to the point where it is also just running down a bunch of hallways. The main difference between Final Fantasy X and Sudeki is that Sudeki is a 12-hour game, and Final Fantasy X is quadruple that amount. The reason why FF10 is so memorable to its story and characters is because it gave them a lot of time and fleshed them out. The ending might actually be one of the worst I've ever seen in a video game. In fact, let's watch it real quick. It's only 1.5 minutes long.
You can't keep us apart anymore. I praise you, Tetsu!
And so the fable fell into the past. Sudeki was born bright at last. When truth besought, the truth will out, and brightness cast the darkness out. Know thyself with all your faults, and all before you will see you as you truly are.
That's it, by the way. There is no after-credit cutscene. There is no New Game Plus. There's nothing. Sure, the visuals are cool, but that doesn't mean anything if there's nothing of substance to them. What frustrates me the most about this story and everything surrounding it is that there is a hint of something there. It's full of ideas that could be something great, but they're just that. Ideas. It's like the writers woke up at 3 a.m., wrote something on a post-it note, and then forgot about it the next morning when they woke up. Like, you go to the underworld and come across a room full of decapitated warrior heads, and nothing happens. No one says anything, and you can't interact with them. This place is supposed to be the heaven that Buki and her people dream about going to, but all these supposedly great fallen warriors don't even get a single glance by the party. We also get to travel to Ecloria, the world of darkness. But of course that also comes with the trope of running across the dark versions of our heroes, because of course they exist. And I won't lie, they look way cooler than our protagonists. Especially Alexine, the dark counterpart to Ailish. Hands down, she has the best outfit in this entire game. We even get to team up with them to take down a few bad guys, which is pretty cool, but in the end, kind of nothing. Unfortunately, that also means the story hinders the gameplay quite a lot. Well, at least in terms of RPG aspects. As any RPG fan will tell you, side quests are a big part of the experience, but because of the linear nature of everything, they're often difficult to do. That is, if you can even find them in the first place. There's no indication of if an NPC even has a side quest for you to take on, you just have to talk to them and find out. Whether this is a good or bad thing is really up for debate. Some would argue that it is more immersive that way and harkens back to RPGs of old, but I personally find it more tedious than anything. The most annoying part about the side quests is actually completing them because of the game's linear nature. Like this NPC outside of the first dungeon who asks you to bring some spider legs for a soup that she's making. So you go and get them and think, okay, I'll just finish the dungeon and then go hand them in like any normal person would. But once you beat that dungeon, instead of returning to town like normal, you're sucked into the next part of the plot and won't be able to return to that NPC until many hours later. The only way you could possibly finish this quest before then is to backtrack all the way out the dungeon, hand in the items, and then go all the way back through the dungeon to where you were, if the game will even let you do that. And half the time, the NPCs won't even tell you how much of an item you actually need to complete the quest fully. So you'll just have to go back and forth and grind for a low item drop until the NPC is satisfied. The most offensive of these side quests have to be the ones to get the character's ultimate weapons. In order to get them, you have to give 4 totem items to these statues. You can get these totems from random treasure chests hidden throughout the world, or by completing side quests given to you by NPCs. The problem with this is, there is only one of these statues for each of the characters to give totems to, and it has to be that specific character. Not to mention, these statues are in very out-of-the-way places. And once again, because of the linear story, if the plot doesn't have you going in the direction of one of these statues, or that certain character needed isn't in your party, then you can't turn the totems in. Which is 70% of the game, by the way. There's only like 3 or so instances where you actually have your full party together in this entire game. And no, you can't do it with the Dark World characters. I already tried. The worst part about all of this is that they are absolutely useless. There is 0 point to having these weapons except for Tal's. If you remember what I said earlier about how all the boss fights are one-on-one battles, well, guess who fights the final boss all by themselves? Any other place where the other character's ultimate weapons would have come into use have long since passed by the time you get them. And it's just not worth it to go through all the tedium to obtain them. Sudeki is so full of cliches and tropes, it's eye-rollingly offensive on a narrative level. It wants to be Final Fantasy so badly, but it doesn't understand what makes Final Fantasy so great and beloved. All it can do is take the most basic ideas from it and other JRPGs and try to make a poorly cobbled together imitation. I feel like a lot of this is probably Microsoft's doing, because apparently it was a radically different game before they scooped up the IP from Climax. But Even then, supposedly before all that, the story went through numerous rewrites and they couldn't really settle on anything. After all, this was a gameplay first kind of game, which, if I haven't reiterated enough already, Sudeki greatly succeeds in. When it's not being a buggy mess. I don't know if it's just the PC port or not, but this game is full of graphical glitches and bugs. Like, game-breaking restart from the very beginning kind of bugs. From glitching out of the boss arena and soft-locking myself out of story progression, to cutscene triggers and NPCs not loading in, because I guess somewhere I stepped on an inconveniently placed pixel? Like, for example, this boss just didn't spawn at all. I tried reloading my save, and it finally loaded in like it should, but as soon as I beat it, it respawned and started attacking me during the cutscene, which then created a whole new slew of bugs of my party not following me and cutscenes not triggering. I tried reloading my saves multiple times and nothing seemed to work. Eventually, I just restarted the game itself and everything worked just fine. Why this happened, I'll never know, but it's extremely frustrating. Surprisingly, despite all of the complaining that I've done, I can't say that I dislike this game. Yeah, there's a lot of bad in it, but there's also a lot of good. Had I played this as a teenager, I probably would have loved it. In fact, I think I can confidently say that I do love it even now, and I'm glad I got to experience it. The combat and gameplay is really fun. Graphically, the world and characters look really good, well, except for the faces. The music is cozy, and the game just has a really chill vibe to it. I feel like in this age of remakes and remasters, Sudeki would greatly benefit from having one. And I'm talking about a full from the ground up remake that redesigns all the characters, rewrites the story and fleshes it out, and everything in between. Truly make this game be Sudeki, like its name is derived from. Because the potential is there for it to be the 9 out of 10 game that Microsoft was betting on it being back in the day. And if I can be real with you for a second, I really need to see what the Overwatch fan animators will do to Ailish and Buki. Please, I'm begging you, I'll do anything! I know it'll never happen though. Not in this weird politically charged gaming landscape the industry has morphed into over the past couple of years. My girl Ailish and her fat milkers would never survive the backlash. But I guess for now, there's always the PC port of the game that you can play. For very cheap, by the way, if you want to experience everything for yourself, which I honestly recommend. Game's fun. Okay, that's all I wanted to talk about. Bye.
What's the matter? It won't come out. I think it must have stained the floor. If you just wait a bit, Aaron, I'll have it looking just as clean as usual in no time.